Very good. Okay, welcome members of the public and members of council. This is our official plan update committee. Due to the efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect all individuals, the city facilities will not be open to the public to attend council and committee meetings until further notice. The public can observe meetings of council and committees by viewing the live stream of the open session part of these meetings, which can be accessed on the city's website or on the city's YouTube page. For written comments, the public may submit written correspondence regarding agenda matters by email to clerks@richmondhill.ca. And for electronic delegations, the public may apply to appear as an electronic delegation by video conference or by telephone. And the applications to appear as an electronic delegation must be submitted by 12 p.m. the day before the meeting by email to clerks@richmondhill.ca. So with that, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Agenda before us. Thank you, Regional Councillor Pirelli and Councillor West. All in favor? Okay, is anyone opposed? That carries. Very good. Any members of the committee have a disclosure of pecuniary interest, and please state the general nature thereof. I see none. Okay, we move to the adoption of the minutes of our previous meeting. The minutes of the official plan update committee meeting held on January 19th be adopted. Mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor West and Councillor Silivitz. All in favor? Okay, any opposed? That also carries. Very good. We move to our scheduled business, and we have a presentation from staff regarding the official plan update, including engagement on the official plan to date, planning for change, emerging key directions for the updating of the official plan, and our next steps. So that presentation will be, I'm assuming, will be made by Commissioner Kwan. I don't see who's presenting on the screen, but go ahead. Who's ever in charge of this presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor.
Commissioner Kwan. Okay.
I will allow me to do the introductions, and then I will turn the presentation and the balance of today's program over to our team. So welcome, everybody. This is our fourth official plan update committee meeting, which forms an important part of our ongoing public consultation process in an effort to update our official plan. Today, we have a presentation from both Sibel Von Kersel, our manager of policy, and David Dixon, our consultant and Stantec's Urban Places Fellow. Sibel will speak to the progress thus far on the OP update, including what we have heard from many of our consultation sessions. She will provide a presentation on key directions for the OP update, and finally lay out a timeline on the rollout of the 3 batches of official plan amendments that will constitute the city's official plan update. Sibel will explain the process in detail, but one thing I would like to emphasize is that nothing can take place in the city or be formalized until the regional official plan update is adopted by council and approved by the province. David Dixon, who you are all very well familiar with, will present his recently released document, Planning for Change, which we have coined as the city's official plan update playbook. This is a document that is a bit of a how-to guide regarding development in Richmond Hill, how it can move forward and becoming an attractive, highly functioning, complete community. The playbook informs staff and council not only in terms of the completion of the OP update, but also as an ongoing reference guide for how we will consider development applications to keep us on and going in the right direction. The document also identifies Richmond Hill's planning direction to the general public, our stakeholders, the development industry, as well as our public sector partners. Sibel will have a few opening slides, followed by David's presentation, and at the conclusion of David's presentation, we'll have a short Q&A. Sibel will then pick up the balance of the presentation, and at the end of her session, we can also then have a Q&A. So in terms of the purpose of today's meeting, it is really twofold: to receive your feedback as the committee and other members who are participating with respect to the proposed direction that will inform phase 3 of our official plan update process. We also want to receive committee support to host a second open house where staff can present the proposed directions for feedback from the general public. So at this point in time, I'll now turn this presentation over to Sibel. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sibel.
Thank you, Calvin. If we could just get the presentation up on the screen, that would be great. So Calvin has already given you a bit of a review of the agenda. So if we could move to the next slide, please. You'll see that's the agenda and the meeting purpose. So I'll begin to just talk a little bit about the engagement that we have done in relation to the official plan. And as you'll see on the slide, and you may recall attending, we had an open house in February where we shared with the public vision and urban structure ideas, and also spoke about pillars that would help to inform how we update our official plan. And sorry, if you'll just bear with me for a moment, I just need to get my screen to help me with my notes. So just 1 second. I am stuck. Okay, so following the open house, we also posted, we had an online survey, and in May we posted a What We Heard report, which outlined what we heard through the public consultation so far with respect to the vision and urban structure and the pillars. And we also had some meetings with our prescribed bodies, which are identified here on the screen, school boards, local municipalities that are adjacent to the city, as well as agencies and utility companies. We also consulted with the Indigenous communities to let them know what we are doing in relation to the official plan update and find out what their interests are and their concerns and how they would like to be involved in this process. In terms of the What We Heard report, sorry, if we can just move to that slide. This was prepared by Laura Consulting. It is a culmination of what we heard during the open house through our online survey and submissions we received following the open house. In short, we heard a lot, but with respect to the vision, pillars, and emerging structure, we heard that most people had some level of support for the vision we proposed. Only 10% felt that it did not at all reflect their ideal 2041 vision for Richmond Hill. There was a lot of support for the 4 pillars, especially the one related to being green and sustainable. And in terms of the urban structure, planning for our MTSAs in a locally contextual way received the most support, while considering the expansion to the urban area was not at all well received, with 66% strongly disagreeing that it would help to achieve the 2041 vision for the city. If we could go to the next slide, please. In May, you may recall, we embarked on another round of consultation. This time we focused on the business community to get a better understanding of the opportunities and constraints our official plan provides in relation to decisions this industry makes in terms of investing and or expanding their business in Richmond Hill, and how this investment contributes to job growth. We also held 6 workshops regarding specific centers within the study with the general public to have a better understanding of what we need to consider when planning for these areas, and in order to establish a more clear vision for these areas that better responds to the overall 2041 vision for the city. Following these consultations, we held a focus group discussion with the business community and meetings with representative landowners within each of the centers to discuss what we heard through our public consultation and discuss how the public response and current planning policy does or does not align with their long-term development aspirations in these specific areas. You may also recall we shared a staff report with council, which reported on the region's work so far in relation to their municipal comprehensive review and policy directions for the new regional official plan. In August, we posted on our website and shared with you Phase 2 What We Heard reports in relation to the public consultation and associated online surveys. And we posted a document prepared by David Dixon called Planning for Change, which David will be speaking about in his presentation. If we go to the next slide, please. In terms of the two phase 2 what we heard reports, the findings from these workshops have been incorporated into the key directions work, so I will not speak to these reports in depth right now. One interesting observation I will share, however, is that while the business community workshop was focused on economic development, through the workshops, one thing we noted was that planning for centers and corridors and neighborhoods is important to this community because they rely on employees and clients that live within and near Richmond Hill. And many highlighted that housing affordability plays a big factor in their business investment decision-making. Similarly, when conducting the center workshops, it was abundantly clear that planning for these areas cannot be only focused on residential development, and that these areas need to provide a mix of uses and become destinations in their own right for people to live, work, innovate, shop, and play. If we could go to the next slide, please. The engagement to date, in addition to research undertaken by staff for this OP update and related initiatives, together inform the key directions I will be speaking to later in today's meeting. At a very high level, the essence of these key directions are threefold. We need to update our official plan to articulate a 2041 vision for city planning. We need to establish an urban structure that directs growth to centers and corridors, supports economic development by enabling jobs within the city, and ensures development is environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable. And thirdly, we need to address issues such as housing affordability, out-migration of residents for job, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and accommodation of diversity of lifestyles among city residents and workers. Next slide, please. When we update our official plan, we need to take into consideration today's planning context, which is much different from the context we were working with back in 2010 when Council adopted the Building a New Kind of Urban official plan. At the provincial, regional, and local level, the context has changed in so many ways. We have new and updated provincial plans, which we have noted in our staff reports and previous presentations. These plans have become more directive and in some ways more protective of the environment, natural and rural areas. The Planning Act has changed to give councils more decision-making authority and also to reduce red tape and expedite planning approvals. At the regional level, we know the region is updating its official plan and will be taking on a more active role when it comes to matters such as employment area protection and settlement area expansions. At the local level, in 2019, we officially became city, and that in and of itself has its connotations and raises expectations in terms of how this city functions and competes within the broader regional context and even at the Greater Toronto Area scale. And as you'll hear from David Dixon next, there are powerful trends that pose new opportunities and challenges that can shape how we update our official plan. These include rapid knowledge industry growth and the rise of new work models, dramatic demographic change, enhanced transit, including the subway, and rapidly evolving mobility technologies, and growing housing affordability challenges, and growing awareness of and responsibility for addressing climate change. And now I'll turn the presentation over to David to speak about those matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibel. But since you just presented it, I don't have to say anything, but I will. I'll jump into detail. So next, please. Thanks. And it's a pleasure and an honor to have a chance to speak to all of you, and frankly, to have been invited by you and Sibel and Patrick and Kelvin to put this playbook together. It was a chance for me to sort of consolidate thoughts and to really understand this thinking in terms of Richmond Hill and creating a more complete community and the things that your great community is so visibly interested in. So the playbook is about, and I'm sorry, I'm going to read here, informing the official plan update, meaning the kind of background data and trends that I've discussed and will discuss, providing guidance to council and planning staff to implement the updated official plan over time. And that's something I look forward to more discussion about, but it sort of frankly draws on my own experience in watching communities that are more and or less successful at really achieving the goals they set out to implement when they started a planning process, and those that emerged during a planning process, and therefore able to really chart their own futures. And then finally, adding additional perspectives from working with many communities in how Richmond Hill and other communities can really manage change to create more complete communities. And what next, please. And one of the things that just struck me as I was listening to Sibel is how aligned the different goals of your update are, because focusing growth towards centers and corridors is exactly what is necessary, particularly in more suburban communities, to attract more jobs and investment, to achieve greater environmental responsibility, to protect the neighborhoods that and in really in ways that people value that do exist, and protect nature. Your goals are very, from my perspective, are very well aligned. And boy, does that make this process simpler and more productive. I was really struck by the priorities that council articulated for this process, as I understood them: balancing growth and green, which again are very much about focusing growth towards centers and corridors. A strong sense of belonging. To me, that is very much about creating places that really bring people together to celebrate and enjoy shared community, getting around, taking advantage of the extension of transit, and recognizing the role that rapid mobility innovations will play in actually supporting transit, not supplanting, but supporting it as we go forward. Love to talk more about that. And fiscal responsibility. A community without resources is not a community that can do much for its residents. And clearly a policy of focusing growth towards centers and corridors is about creating a much stronger fiscal base going forward. So the council's priorities have really been the foundation that I was asked to work with, and that I observe everyone working with, and I think very effectively so. It's important, and I really noted this, that the plan for me to note that it's, from everything I can tell, that the recommendations, the directions, I should say, not recommendations, that are emerging, focusing growth towards centers and corridors in ways that promote walkability, and don't take development as a goal in its own right, but a tool for creating the kind of Richmond Hill you want. If you were a very poor community that had trouble attracting investment, that folks didn't view as a place with, you didn't have a really terrific quality of life, you'd be less in a position to do this. But you're in a position to really use development as a tool to meet your larger goals. And that's a great position to be in. And more lively public spaces, more choices for folks about how to live, work, play, and where they can do this. More affordability, and this is as much about economic development as it is about any sort of moral or larger complete community goals that you have. And I think, as Sibel has alluded to, authenticity is something, a place that celebrates its living culture. You're not Toronto 2 or Vaughan or whatever, you're Richmond Hill, and you have a wonderfully diverse community with a living culture you can really draw on to bring life to public spaces, to really create a place that is increasingly authentic to who you are. And then it's important to really understand that change, I don't need to tell you this, I'm sorry, this is for the record, doesn't stop. The official plan, no plan gets everything right. Part of what is essential for a good, strong plan is a process, and you have an official plan amendment process in place, but a process for working through changes that really holds true to the goals and values that your whole community brought forward as they participated in this effort, in ways that really inform the decisions that new circumstances will call upon you to make. And I hope that was not too convoluted. Next, please. So I mentioned before, Sibel alluded to, but you've got 2 decades of real opportunity ahead of you in ways that will really help achieve, or central to achieve it. You could not have picked 4 priorities at a better time in terms of your chances to achieve them. I'll put it that way, based on the changes going on. It will also, these changes, with opportunity comes challenges. The more folks want to live in your community and work and play, the more expensive housing gets and the more challenging affordability is. And frankly, nothing can slow growth or the ability to adapt to it, changing economic opportunities, et cetera. Nothing can choke that off faster than to be a community that the next generation, including the next generation growing up in Richmond today, can't afford to live in. So to be able to continue to provide opportunities for the full spectrum of who you are and need to be a complete community really matters. And one thing I think is really important, and I really much love about this process, is really engaging people in managing change, which means helping them understand the changes going on around them and understanding from them the changes in their lives and their aspirations. And that's an ongoing process as you not only put this plan together, but implement it. Next, please. And I'm sorry, this is not meant to be a lecture that you've probably heard before from me anyway, when it wasn't meant to be a lecture. So if somebody has a question, I know it's supposed to come at the end, but please just jump in. So, okay, so one I think it's, and I've said this before, but always want to note is folks ask a lot in every community I work, what has COVID-19 changed? Often they're concerned that the whole premise of the planning process they're engaged in somehow is no longer valid because of what we've learned from COVID-19. In this case, it is even more valid, and actually in most cases. So first of all, it's important to know that that this pandemic across North America has, and this is a little bit of an old meme. For a while, people were saying, gee, there's a flight for density. In fact, housing values, interest in where people want to live in dense versus non-dense, traditionally suburban neighborhoods has actually not changed over the course of COVID, other than in San Francisco and to some extent New York, which are very, very high value areas. What has happened is it's much clearer that we cannot have islands of isolated poverty and in our society, because that's where COVID has grown fastest and been caused the most disruption. It has, and these are things that are very consistent with your planning. Pandemic has hastened the decline of auto-oriented mass market retail. Everyone knows this, due to not only competition from digital retail, but also, frankly, as we're getting richer and poorer, mass market retail is less relevant. Folks are more focused on retail that relates to them and their values and their lifestyles. So it's
Excuse me, Mr. Dixon.
Oh,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you. I just, I was going to ask Councilor Barros to mute his microphone, but it's muted now. Oh, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt there.
Oh, no, not at all. And if anyone has questions, please throw them in. So it has hastened the decline of traditional, what would traditionally supported retail. Now it's a great sidewalk and folks living within 5 minutes that bring a main street to life. Hence, the opportunities for great urban neighborhoods, and particularly the new mixed-use walkable neighborhoods you can create in these centers and corridors. It would have been much harder to do this in a way that you really loved 20 years ago than it will be for the next 20 years. When folks wanted to drive out to a shopping center. Now the rest of Richmond Hill is going to want to go shop on the great new streets and enjoy the public spaces you create. It has certainly increased access to nature and the ability to preserve nature. And something, you're Canada, so I can really say this. I noted that I and many other people put on lots of layers of jackets so we could go eat outside, basically share community, enjoy community, be out with folks. And if anything, the pandemic has shown us just how increasingly important communities that were places where people can share community is to folks, particularly as we grow more diverse. The pandemic has not slowed the basic trends that Sibel referred to, and I'm going to talk about more. And it certainly has not slowed the growing interest in walkability and shared community. Next, please. So I'm going to talk, these are the headlines around change, the economic imperative, and Sibel really mentioned this, and I have too in talking to you, and I'm sure you well remember it, but the vast majority of net new jobs, not total jobs, net new jobs, say, will require higher education going forward. And pretty soon we're going to get to the point where more than half of net new, the jobs being created, will require 4 or more years of education. At the same time, we have a fundamental shortage of the talent that is how we often refer to an educated workforce. This is going to sound very elitist for a minute, and I'm going to try and take some of that edge off in a minute. But it is communities that attract this talent, which in turn will attract the jobs and investment. And the fact, one thing that we're discovering, the fact that more and more workers want to work remotely is not slowed this. If anything, it's accelerated it, because companies want to be, particularly in knowledge and innovation industries where informal interactions, creative collisions is the term of art. People just run into each other, discovering an idea neither knew they had, probably working for different companies. Those are growing steadily more important. What that's doing is actually accelerating the trend to bring companies into walkable, urban, mixed-use, lively places where their workforce wants to live, A, in the hope that they will come to the office, B, with the expectation that even if they're not in the office a lot, they're sort of still all running into each other. They're part of now, if not an innovation office, an innovation community. And one place I really learned this, and boy, did it come through emphatically, was doing planning, which we're still doing, for Canada North, which is it's either the first or second largest innovative cluster in Canada, just outside of Ottawa, which has been a suburban office park. They recognized that was not the future. These companies were already having trouble attracting workforce, but with the advent of COVID pandemic, they didn't become less interested in being urban and walkable. They became more interested because they wanted to create a community of innovation to support their companies. And I think certainly the centers and corridors that Sibel has talked about will be great places to do this. And with the graphic on the bottom, that chart, the maps reminds us of the fact there's a lot of competition in the GTA, but you're certainly up to it. And that if you talk to tech companies about what strategies matter most, it's not new products, it's not merging with the competition, et cetera, or finding emerging markets. It remains and is increasingly talent. Next, please. Now, I said I'd take the edge off. One of the things that because this is very important, worked hard to understand is what is the job multiplier that knowledge industry jobs have. And it turns out to be pretty strong. So each new knowledge industry job requiring a fair amount of education, tends to create about 3 to 5 other jobs, often jobs that are being lost and therefore are replaced. They're not all low-wage service industry jobs. They're all over the place. They also support other folks in starting businesses and support smaller businesses. So the benefits are much broader than the obvious. So I've already said, okay, it's about drawing talent to communities of innovation. I jumped ahead with creative collisions, but creative collisions, we did planning for Kendall Square, which is the heart of New England's, it's probably the most successful life science innovation cluster in North America. And what was really interesting was they really measure innovation productivity, as does Canada North. Canada North has said that since the pandemic started, their innovation productivity is down 54%. How they measure that, I cannot tell you, but boy, can I tell you it matters to them. And the solution, they're trying to get their people to come back in or start talking to each other. It's these creative collisions, the unplanned, not the plan, not the Zoom calls, the unplanned interactions that really spur this. Sibel has talked a lot about, and maybe not so much this morning, but certainly in the past, about 15-minute centers, corridors, places where within 15 minutes you can walk to all of the things that are part of life, the fun, the jobs, the breweries, which are as much about economic development as they are fun. Places where your kids can play, schools, etc. It takes the density of a center or a corridor to support this. Incidentally, the photograph on your right, which I know I've shown you before, is Dublin, Ohio. I did a lot of planning. Dublin is regarded by many, or was for a long time, as the most successful suburb in the US Midwest in terms of rapid growth, attracting all the knowledge industries out of Columbus, Ohio, et cetera. And Dublin, a couple of years ago, realized their model, which was all around golf courses and amenity, no longer worked. They needed a downtown, so they created one, and they made sure that it wasn't just buildings, it was streets and parks and public spaces, and, for example, where the farmers market would go every Saturday. Next, please. In part, to attract talent, in part to make sure this new center was owned by, felt part of everyone's community, not an island of sort of privilege or elitism in a larger community. It was the heart of the entire community. So focusing growth toward complete mixed-use centers and corridors is what creates these communities. A, because this is where talent wants to go. B, because it promotes the interactions that really matter. I'd say there are fewer signs of success that are more potent than what a place that people will call a main street, where they can walk, shop, run into friends, hang out, etc. If people develop that sense of a place, you know you've succeeded. And that is all supported by folks living nearby, but also making sure that street is there and you've got the rules in place to make sure that the uses along each side of it are mixed use and all those great things. It's really important to note that as our virtual workforce grows, they are choosing the same neighborhoods as folks who wanted to live in these neighborhoods and be near offices before. And this is really important because folks who work from home are more likely to start new businesses. It is new businesses are actually the biggest source of job creation, not mature businesses. They are also, as I said before, actually, and now the recovery that's coming back into Manhattan really shows as innovation companies are moving in, the larger companies really want to be where these folks are, even if they're not working directly for them. Next, please. So hopefully no surprise here. It is robust public-private partnerships. And these are not about grants, these are about investments that pay pretty rich dividends. It is making sure that a development that, let's say, in the first 5 or 10 years might not be able to afford the walkable streets, the main streets, the public squares where people gather, the places that really attract talent. It's not the apartment or certainly not a blank glass wall. It's the life that is created by density and interaction, but also making sure the dollars are there to create those places, make them wonderful, maybe support retailers in initial years if they don't pay enough rent to justify the cost of the building they're in. All of this policies pay rich dividends, and there's lots of evidence for that if people want to ask more about this. Next, please. So we have the imperative. Luckily, demographics in the housing market are the same thing, as you all know. Housing market is 2/3 of the real estate economy, actually, in the greater Toronto area and across North America, roughly. Right now, North America is oversupplied with detached single-family housing and dramatically undersupplied with multifamily housing in walkable urban places. And that is because 80+% of net new demand, net new growth in our household growth for the next 20 years is going to, and I've told you all this before, but I still emphasize it, it's going to be singles and couples without kids. This is the most, urban is one word, but think walkable, mixed use, lively center and corridor housing market we have had in North America in my very long lifetime, and frankly, history, I think it's fair to say. This in part is aggravating affordability issues. because no community can supply, is that I know of, has been able to supply the housing these folks want fast enough in walkable, urban, mixed-use, lively places, higher quality suburbs also. And as a result, as demand is shifting into one sector, just as the knowledge economy is rewarding folks who are well-educated and often don't have kids. Long story short, particularly in urban housing, and this is certainly true in closer in suburbs and in cities, and this is certainly true of Richmond Hill, housing values have been rising much faster than incomes. And you don't need me or all the employers who have talked to Cbell to remind you that if you price out the next generation or the folks who teach your schools and are your policemen and clean parks and all that, you're just building a new challenges into your community rather than opportunities. Next, please. And I love to say development is, I said earlier, not a goal in its own right. It should be a tool to accomplish the goals you want. So if someone wants to come and develop in Richmond Hill, and they want to create a lot of terrific housing and some office space to go with it. Actually, one of the most competitive kinds of office space these days is the second floor above retail with housing above. And it's something that Dublin, Ohio has done very well with, for example. The value to Richmond Hill is, of course, the investment, of course, the dollars and people and energy this brings, the affordable housing it supports. But the most visible and maybe the most important in the end is going to be the public life it creates along new streets and in new parks lined with activity and places that everybody in Richmond Hill can share in. Next, please. And that makes it a fun and exciting place to be. And then, of course, technology is disrupting everything in all kinds of ways, given how I get the chance to talk to all of you today. For purposes here, most immediately, probably two. One, the fact that we are at nowhere near the end of growing absorption by digital retail of total sales in increasing market segments. And just so you see, two quick comments here, sort of anecdotes. One is when more than 50% of, or not 50, when online retail began to make significant inroads into clothing, that was sort of the writing on the wall, because that for a long time people felt, well, that's a standard, a soft goods retail category that will hold out. In fact, when it didn't, people realized that other than, yeah, sorry.
I apologize, Mr. Dixon, Mr. Chair. It appears that we have lost quorum. We do need to confirm quorum. Thank you. We'd have quorum again, Mr. Chair. I apologize, Mr. Dixon.
Okay, thank you. I was concerned I wasn't being interesting enough. Anyway, it was a sign that there is, digital retail is increasingly figuring out ways to become more competitive, as we all know. But the other, and what I want to focus on, and why don't we go to the next slide, please, is mobility. The North American automobile fleet turns over every 15 years, basically. 15 years from now, we won't be in the era of autonomous mobility, but we will certainly be into the era of an era dominated by connected mobility, meaning vehicles will talk to each other, talk to what's the buildings they're passing. That means they will be able to drive in 7-foot lanes rather than 10 or 11-foot lanes. We'll be able to reclaim streets. This is certainly not an era where we should be investing in additional traffic lanes. We will be able to expand sidewalks, create greenways, et cetera. They will self-park, and sadly for us, or maybe good for us, our cars park themselves a lot more conveniently than we do. We'll just say, go park yourself to our car, and it will take about 2/3 of the space we took, meaning all the parking we've invested in will be able to contain more and more cars, meaning let's really try and hold off on very expensive investments in parking, create as much shared parking as we can. But one of the sort of completely meaningless debates that was going on is, should we invest in, preparing for autonomous mobility or in transit? In fact, connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles that can communicate with transit are going to be handmaidens for each other. Last mile, the subway shows up, train shows up, and there are 14 shared autonomous vehicles or connected vehicles that know to be there to pick up folks and take them where they want to go next. Long haul trips, meaning into downtown Toronto, are handled much more efficiently and less costly and probably more conveniently by transit, particularly transit that's connected to the other ways people travel, which of course we can't do today. One of the things that my good colleagues in our generation, our Mobility Next group, our group that looks at autonomous mobility, have calculated is that communities that have the density of people, of destinations to really support in 20 years, let's say, robust shared autonomous mobility. That means the kinds of the uses and the whole approach that Sibel has been talking about for centers and corridors will be able to will mean that folks can own many fewer cars. No one will need 2 cars in a family, or very few, the way we do now. And many households will not need a single car. It will, on average, cut mobility costs by about 50% compared to folks who live in less dense areas where owning one's own vehicle will matter more. And please ask me more if you want to. Next, please. And of course, climate change, and I think many of the communities I work in are not communities immediately impacted in the more obvious ways by climate change, but they are heavily impacted by the increased sense of responsibility folks want to take for slowing, and that's probably as positive I can get, climate change, for the greater sense of environmental responsibility. Nothing is the single most responsible thing any community could do to cut per capita carbon or emissions footprints is to create denser centers and walkable centers and corridors. They basically, folks in places like this have often roughly a quarter of the emissions footprint that folks who live in an auto-dependent neighborhood do, for example. Nothing can compete with that. All kinds of other things really matter, but to be an environmental responsible community, the things Sibel talked about are really front and center. Next, please. Managing change over time. The 2 illustrations to your right, I guess they are a project I had the pure pleasure of working on, a place called Newton, Massachusetts, which is a suburb that for years had resisted things like density and mixed use and walkable. It was a comfortable, affluent suburb just outside of Boston. My kids actually grew up there, so I know it well. And there are big islands of strip retail. This was one of them. Developers stepped forward and said, we want to create a new walkable, mixed-use, lively center. Actually, we suggested that they do it, and they took us up on it. And it's basically in development now. The reason I bring this to you is what they did. They went to the city and said, City of Newton is a suburb called Sulphur City, as you know, do about 90,000 folks, I think, at this point, and said, we want to create this place. But they had to make their case, and this is how we are consistent with the values and goals. This may look different, but it grows directly out of the planning that you have been doing in recent years. And that really struck me. And the message, as I thought here, given how hard you're all working, the time, the energy, the just tremendous investment that a planning process like this takes, it is really important going forward, if it's going to be meaningful, to, I think, hold true to the goals, the values that shaped it. If those turn out to be outdated, then it's really important probably to do a plan update and draws the whole community. And I say this because I've seen lots of other communities around Boston abandon the letter and spirit of their planning and make mistakes that they paid heavy prices for over time. And I'd be glad to talk more about this if you want. And actually, next, to put a finer point on this, one of the things that I just suggested and talked to Sibel and Patrick is, there are a lot of plans are going to come forward that reflect, that are born of issues, of opportunities that were not considered. They weren't known at this time, changed circumstances, new kinds of jobs, et cetera. How in this plan, how then would one suggest to council you evaluate the request for amendments? And what are what is, and I said before, development should never be a goal in its own right. It is a tool for creating the kind of community you want. So what are some of the kinds of criteria that grow out of the 4 pillars, which in turn grow out of the council's priorities for what should Richmond Hill seek to achieve as it grants, for example, amendments to this plan? And I think this is probably as much as I should say here. Been asked to say next, I think. You know what? This is a slide making the same point. Actually, thank you. Thank me for putting this here. I'm sorry. This is Arlington, Virginia, which has done a wonderful job, a really terrific job of using transit to create a series of high density, mixed use, walkable places with really rich, lively public realms that are highly valued by the large majority of the population that lives in nearby single family houses, particularly those within a 5, maybe 10-minute walk of these corridors and centers, because they planned the transitions well. They have held faith with their plan. And so it's something that everybody now trusts. And there is a real sort of redefinition of what a suburban community can be about as it transitions to reflect the kinds of opportunities and challenges and trends that I've talked about. And I mentioned to Sibel and Patrick, these be great folks to go and talk to if you wanted to. Anyway, thank you very much. And I'm love to answer any questions. You've been very patient to listen to me here without interruption, except when I bored you. So any questions? I'm sensing that they aren't, but
Thank you very much, Mr. Dixon. Thank you for your wise words, your extensive high-level approach to this that will help guide us so well through our official plan update process.
thank you.
I open the floor up now to members of the committee, anyone who has questions for Mr. Dixon. Councillor West, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll start off because I always forget if I don't do it right away. If you need a motion to receive the report or whatever it is that we need, I'm happy to move that.
Please, yes, moved by our Vice Chair, Councillor West. The comments are received, and I don't need a seconder, just mover. I forgot that for a committee. Thank you. That's on the floor.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Dixon. I've truly enjoyed listening to your presentation since we met, I guess, a while ago when all this process started. You really help us to focus, or at least help me. I can't speak for others, I suppose, but help me to focus my thoughts on what it is that we're looking for. And I do find that a lot of what you're saying is very consistent with the kinds of things that I'm hearing from the community. I think actually it's consistent with what we're hearing in the What We Heard document, actually. And I think, I just want to emphasize a couple of things. I think what we're really talking about here is quality of development. And I actually really, I wrote down your point about, development is just a tool to get us to where we want to go as a community. And I think that's actually very important. It's very simple, but it's very important because, what we're hearing, or what I'm hearing from my residents a lot is, they totally understand the need for development. It's going to happen regardless of whether we like it or not. And I think it can be leveraged to get us where we want to go. But I think in my mind, the whole process that we're going through right now, and I think this is consistent with what you're saying, is that we need to get there in a quality kind of way. It's not how big we can make the towers. It's not how high they are. It's what is appropriate where, and how does it create a more vibrant community, and that is really the important thing.
Mhm.
I find, and this is I don't want to make a general blanket statement, because large buildings are certainly appropriate in places in Richmond Hill, there's no question. But I can't help but notice in a lot of the examples that you're giving of vibrant places that the buildings in the background are not 50 stories tall. You know, they're human scale. They're places that create a vibrant community for arts and culture, for community gathering, for events, for all the things that make our lives rich. And I don't mean that necessarily just financially, but financially too, I suppose. But I think that that's really the goal here. And that's certainly what we've heard in the What We Heard document. There are some, quite frankly, I think there's a number of contradictions to what council has, the direction that council has suggested in this term versus what we're hearing from the public in the What We Heard. And I hope that we will take into consideration all of that as we move forward. And in my conversations with staff, I know that they've taken that in and understand it. Mm-hmm. So one other thing, I mean, just specifically, I think that is also interesting is that I think when people think of vibrance, they think of public spaces, and one of the types of public spaces that they think about is parks. And I think that that's really important. And there's, quality development to me means a lot more than it's a pretty building and it has great architecture. It means, what's around it, what amenities are there to support the people that live there, transit, but also green spaces where people can, hang out. And if, you talked about, well, what we've learned during the pandemic, we've learned that. I mean, our parks have never been so busy and valued by our community. And I would add that I think that from what I've seen in Richmond Hill, and I suspect a lot of other municipalities across North America and maybe the world right now. So I think we need to be really planning for that kind of thing and making sure that we have those types of amenities for people to create a really vibrant community. I have a couple of specific comments in the the document itself, which I may wait for second round. One other thing, I guess I'm not sure how much time I have left, but affordability is also a very important thing. And I'm glad that you mentioned it. It's certainly been reflected in a lot of the discussions that we've had so far. I believe it's very important for us as a council to make sure that we very shortly endorse the plan to get staff to come up with a better plan than we have right now to address affordability in conjunction with our official plan update. So I hope that council will be looking to get that process moving again after we voted kind of against moving it forward. But I think it's important that we do that, because I think that now is the opportunity to effectively address affordability to the degree that we can. I mean, we're not going to be able to solve the entire problem, but during the OP update, that's the time that we need to be dealing with affordability. It's a golden opportunity. So I'll leave I'm probably out of time, so I'll leave my comments at that at the moment, and I may need to speak in the second round. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make a couple of
Thank
very
you for your
quick-
motion. Go ahead, Mr. Dixon.
Okay, I'm sorry, very quick, and thank you very much. And I think one reason I would certainly agree with you that this is a good time to look at affordability is so it isn't looked at in a silo. It's one of a series of issues that all affect each other. What kind of community do you want to be in 10 years or 20 years from lots of perspectives? The only comment I would make on height, and this is always a very touchy subject with folks, is that within a short walk of transit, there can be really compelling reasons to have tall buildings. What Arlington has done a really good job of is saying within 5 minutes of a new metro station, we have really tall buildings. We have a very conscious plan for stepping down to nearby neighborhoods, which are often no more than a quarter of a mile away, but it works. It works because, how do I say it? People may not have seen those buildings 20 years ago, but what they have seen as those buildings appear is a conscious effort to respect their neighborhood by creating rules for transition. Is that making sense?
Yeah, and gee whiz, you said that so much better than I could. So you must be the expert at this. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Sure. Okay, Councillor Shan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, and also Mr. Dixon for the presentation. Some of the things you present to us, Mr. Dixon, are not new in the sense that you have shared the what's happening outside of Richmond Hill and North America around us. And it's certainly like the concepts such as, like now in Ontario, we have this transit-oriented development now known as transit-oriented communities. And now it all affecting how actually change around us. So looking at, we have 2 decades opportunities, and noting that you also preface in the beginning, there are certain things maybe within the crystal ball we can see now, but there are also things that we cannot see.
Yes.
Never mind 20 years, in the next year, next 5 years. So how would, for example, the one that we do now, the provinces along, like Southern Richmond Hill, Richmond Center, they will be led by province on the transit communities. So how would that impact a city like us, 200,000 people within 9 municipalities in York region, within the province of 14 million people, still find our niche to develop in a quality way?
Yeah. Let me see if I may not have fully understood your question, but if I do, the one thing that, and this is a high level answer.
Maybe a big question, sorry.
Okay, but it's a community that has its own plan and can go to the province and say, here is what we are trying to achieve from many perspectives, is clearly in a much better position to create the kinds of centers and corridors served by transit that meet larger provincial goals, but in a way that really works for Richmond Hill. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it certainly, I gather you can expand the interconnected community to interconnected at the public level.
Yes.
That the planning and cooperation and so on and so on. So, okay, I got it. Basically is that the trend towards a walkable and the transit on the communities, I understand it is also that 10 or 15-minute kind of walkable things and pioneered by, like planners. And I understand places like in a number of states, United States cities, I've been doing it. Atlanta, Georgia, and other places. And interesting that you're talking about Northern Virginia. I've been following on that national profile in terms of how to integrate all these mega transit in developing, commercial enterprises, and also linking up with the BIA, Business Improvement Area, and make it really in some way, not so much spearheaded by the municipality, but like a kind of like a private partner, public partnership to really steer that. Do you foresee that we can do something like that in Richmond Hill, in particular, like the corridors on Yonge Street, the future Richmond Hill Center, things of that nature? I'd like to hear your view.
Yeah, and again, if I understand the question correctly, when transit comes, when we have a transit station, you create a great deal of potential value, and you know how to unlock some of that. A developer knows how to unlock some of that, and if you can find the right kind, create the right kind of partnership where the public sector said, here are the larger rules for what we know we need to achieve. We need walkable streets, we need retail, we need mixed income housing. We need good connections to neighborhoods nearby. We need transitions, et cetera. And then let the private sector come in and do what it knows best, which is to figure out how to get the dollars to do this. One of the things that to get the right, and I'm sorry, now I'm going to editorialize maybe more than you might have meant me to, but one of the real important things here is to create the kind of place that attracts developers interested in longer term value. The least useful developer is someone wants to come in and get something permitted so they can sell the same parcel to somebody else for more value, for more money. They have the least stake in the larger community. I'm being very direct. If you get a larger national developer or local developer who plans to own that property and therefore benefit from the appreciation that good planning will create, that the principle that every development should continue walkability and create more value for its neighbors, et cetera, then you're going to have somebody who's going to be a much more creative partner in helping you create the kinds of places you want. Is that making sense?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dixon.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll direct my remaining time towards our staff. And I'm glad to see that there was consultation being done in the June and July with the landowners. Mr. Dixon kind of touched on also at the end of the day, since the city doesn't own much land at all, it's really the landowners that really have to quote unquote play ball and working together, similar to the National Landing Project in the States that we refer to here. So I wonder from the staff perspective, any those
1 minute.
ample opportunities to get cooperation from the landowners through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, and basically our division aligned with the landowners.
Okay, thank you. Sibel?
Excellent question, Councillor Chen, and through you to Councillor Chen. The conversations we had with the landowners were a good first step. We talked about what we heard through our public consultation. We shared with them some of the kind of general vision that seemed to be percolating up for the different centers. And we had general support to proceed with responding to the kind of comments that we received from the general public. So I wouldn't say there were any lightning rods in our discussions, but they are early. And there's a commitment to continue those discussions and build on what we're learning, both from the development community, the landowners, as well as the broader public and stakeholders. So still many more conversations to be had.
Yes, I bet there will be a really continuing journey of trying to have the balanced growth that actually would meet interests of the different parties, diverse parties. So thank you very much for the answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I look forward to, well, maybe more than 2 decades of opportunities. Thank you.
I'm sure you will.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor Chan. And yeah, I certainly encourage local ward councillors to work together with those stakeholders and those people that are coming forward. Often they're saying, Mr. and Mrs. Ward councillor, what can I do to add to your community? Is there a walkway? Is there a park? Is there a pedestrian connection that is required? And how can I better contribute to the surrounding area through my project? So we need to make we have to do that level of cooperation. And Mr. Dixon, thank you very much. I think you said it really well. Our job here as a council, as a committee, is to plan our vision. We have to have a desire on paper for what we want to see in terms of parks and walkways and connectivity and first floor underground of retail concourses that connect all these different buildings. And then when applicants come along, we need to require them to pay their share, to contribute toward that greater vision that we're outlining here. So I really want to thank you for all the things you brought forward. I have a couple questions myself. Now, okay. When you say you're making comparisons to other areas with similar opportunities, do you really see any area that has a similar opportunity to what Richmond Hill is facing with 5 modes of transit intersecting and everything we have? Really, is there?
That's a very good question.
Around the world or North America, what are you looking at as comparators?
Okay, quick answer, and I apologize for my intellectual sloppiness here. I was thinking about communities out that were suburban communities conscious of making a transition to take better advantage of the fact of to manage the changes I talked about and take advantage of the fact that they are in markets that have strong knowledge industry growth, et cetera. And frankly, to be a little bit direct here, well-educated, engaged communities. So there are a couple that strike me as analogous. I can't think of a single one that has the kind of opportunities that you just described coming toward them. And I think it's terrific that you are planning ahead of those rather than when they land in your midst.
Okay,
that
thank
fair?
you for that. So you're not just comparing, similar geographic conditions and accessibility to mass transit. It's demographic.
Yes. Yes.
Comparable areas with
Yeah.
talent level business opportunities.
Yeah, and it's challenges of, places that, so you're all too young to remember Alfred E. Newman, What Me Worry. But one of the things that it's important for there are a lot of suburban communities full with populations of folks who are very successful and whose lives have worked, and these communities have been very successful. They're now entering a period of change. Their success going forward will be about how they manage that change. And in some ways, it can be the hardest for the communities that are the most successful at the beginning of the process. Does that make sense? They often don't have the incentive to manage change, but you're clearly stepping forward and saying, we're going to take responsibility. And I think that's great.
Thank you. And well, as was said in the presentation, it's our residents that are asking us to do this. It's our, and reaching out to them, they're asking us to be forward thinking. They're demanding of us to take the best advantage of the opportunities that we have. I love the aspects of your presentation that speak to the transition that we're undergoing, a generational transition, to be less car dependent. I think it's really important that we note that. I think it's really important that our parking standards and our requirements are going to drastically change. We are situated between with so much mass transit, and all we need is the vehicles to do some individual transit in unique ways, so that people can get, and most of that is walking. We're going to have 100,000 people in a 1 kilometer radius. It's similar to a downtown area, but it's a blank slate and a fresh canvas, and an opportunity to do this in a way that the public sphere can really dictate what it's going to look like and how best to manage those vehicular movements, and that if everything is within a 300-meter walk, everything that you could possibly need, and access to jump on mass transit or a subway to get to other destinations, there's a significantly decreasing requirement and dependency on vehicles at all.
Yes,
and I noticed. Sorry, Markham's got some new, very dense communities that you just don't see cars anymore. In Toronto, there's all kinds of examples. We almost want to make a car-free zone. I mean, we've got the public transit is there more so than anywhere else. I think in North America, the access in South Richmond Hill. So unique opportunities. Thank you for pointing that out, because we're really being held back on seizing these opportunities and taking advantage, because the cost of accommodating all these cars that a family's coming, they're bringing them they need their living space, and they need their cars living space for 2 or 3 vehicles. That's not the case anymore, and it's a new way of planning. So I'll let you respond to that if I'm on the right track or not.
Okay. Oh, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I'm rude to be jumping in. Yeah, it costs, I know the US numbers, and I can't imagine they're very different in Canada. Costs $12,000, $14,000 a year, US dollars, to own and operate a car. And if you can go from 2 cars to 1 car, that's already freeing up a lot of money, a lot of dollars that can be invested and spent by that family, but ultimately by the community and other things that create much more value. A parking space that costs $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. If you don't need it, and you can spend that much on great public realm, supporting a cool new business, et cetera, you're a community that is, those dollars aren't buried. They're helping bring life and adding quality of life to the folks who are your community. I think I'm sort of losing myself here, but it's in my enthusiasm to support your point. Yes.
Thank you. And I just got in my remaining seconds, I just want to point out that this may be one of the keys to unlock the problem, the solution to the problem of our housing affordability crisis. Because we have a crisis, and in New York region, it comes to a head in a sought after community. Because we are the top. We're certainly in the top 5. I think we're second, the most sought after community in Ontario. Our housing prices are reflecting that, and we need to address that. As you showed, the incomes are not going up, but the housing prices are. And we take out this element of housing vehicles and take out all these other expenses that people can eliminate from their lives by living and working and shopping in within 100 meters of their home. That's, I think, a part of the solution. So I'm out of time. I got to cut myself off here. And Councillor Munch, you wanted to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. If I can just say, Richmond Hill is $8.5 million an acre to build. It costs $70,000 for a parking spot. We're the second least housing affordability market in Ontario. We're one of the 16 least housing affordabilities in Canada in the top 10. We have families, as you pointed out, younger families are not coming here. We don't attract families. We can't attract employers. Employers are having a hard time finding employees as it is, and we're going to have a massive competitive disadvantage. We have, as a council, here's a question for you. And I'm just going to reiterate before I do that some of the comments I heard. The balanced growth versus green, use development as a tool to meet our larger goals. We are in a great position. No plan ever gets it right all the time. Nothing can slow a community more than to have the next generation unable to afford where they can live. We need, we have an undersupply of homes and businesses. I'm going to come back to that. Just so we're clear, I took some planning courses over the summer, and I was really surprised to see that Canada is 2 million housing units short of our equilibrium. Since 2006, the last 15 years here, we are 73% or 27% below providing basic shelter for people, which has reduced supply, which has raised dramatically the cost. And since I've been elected in 2004, we actually have done a lot worse, 70%. And we have not met anywhere near. So municipalities, there was just a mayor forum at York Region, and they were saying that the reason why we have a housing problem is because of municipalities, because we're not providing the homes and the jobs requirement where we're at. So this is a very good area when you're talking about where housing cost is growing more than incomes, and we're not providing basic shelter. We're creating sprawl, which is really bad for the environment. It's bad for families, and it forces people to have cars, which they can't afford. It reduces income, all the bad things. I applaud, I will say, at the region last week when they said, thank God we're doing into intensification and magnitude way in order to help the environment. You brought that up. One of the things also I'd like that you brought is roads are going to be smaller. We have not embraced that here as a municipality. We've been fighting that this term galore. I really applaud that transitional change that we're talking about. Here's a question for you, sir.
Sure.
Knowing all the stats that I look at I know you have US stats. The US housing inventories are up. Canadian inventories are down in the last 3 months. Question is that if we're going to have transitional change, and we know that we have to break away from the 40, 50-year model of detached suburban lifestyle that was Richmond Hill, but will not be the Richmond Hill growing forwards, and we have the significant investment in transit that's almost unparalleled, certainly in Canada. I can't speak to the US. Who is going to communicate that vision? Even here on council, we already have people saying, today, hey, do we have lower parking standards or higher parking standards? Should we widen roads or not roads? Do we bring cars into communities? We're putting roads into communities. Our policies going forward are putting roads into communities, contrary to where the future is going. Question is, who's going to communicate the facts that if we're going to have a green and an urbanized growing community for families where people can live, work, and play in a walkable community with major transit and green in the area, who's going to help communicate that? Do we wait for the market to do that when we're doing 20 and 30-year plans? Then we're always behind. Or do we get the staff do it? Do the courts do it? Does a developer do it? You mentioned public-private partnerships. How do we get to the vehicle to break the YIMBY versus NIMBY approach?
Mhm.
When is that going to begin?
1 minute.
Well, you certainly,
Staff.
I'm not just being nice here, have a staff that is well positioned to do that. And to me, you were talking about a conversation that the public sector needs to lead. I know public sector is a broad term. I would think that is staff. I would think that it is, or respond that it is very important to give everybody the same information you have. Because when I add to listen to the long list of benefits that you just threw out, or cost, depending how you look at it, of either of focusing growth into centers and corridors or not continuing sprawl, there's one factor to add, which is that is also where the market is going. And it's really important for folks to understand how the world is changing, how they and you as a community can benefit from it. And that to me is, and I hope I'm answering the question that you asked, and I apologize if I'm not, is public sector leadership. That is not what the private sector is good at doing, creating that conversation. That's one reason why the private sector looks to the public sector for that role. They know that. You certainly can find the right kinds of developers to come in and help in forums and other programs, talk in real terms about the market changes they see and how to meet these. But I think for people, it's important for, everyone in Richmond Hill to know what's happening over the next 20 years and how they can benefit from these changes. And one thing I want to note, and I hope I'm not losing direction here, is that this is not about disrupting or fundamentally changing the single family neighborhoods folks do have. It's probably about not growing them, because then you're competing with yourself as demand lessens. It's about giving them walkable access to the new streets and parks and cafes and cool places that are created, and jobs nearby, and transit that this next generation of change will support. And one does not, encouraging one does not at all imply diminishing the other. Is that getting at your question?
Yeah. So that leads me to a question. Earlier in the presentation today, there was a little bit of a disconnect between what the people are saying they want as to where we need to go. And the problem is that when, in our world, in the political world, there are some people who are going to want to tell people what they want to hear, not necessarily what they need. And that's a really tough poison to go out there on to say, I'm going to help you live a more balanced quality of life. But people don't care about the residents for tomorrow, because the residents today are the ones that matter to where we go. And when we have in this report, when you hear the differences to what the businesses are saying, hey, what we heard is when we want people to be able to work and play in our neighborhoods, but we're not creating communities where people can walk and live and play, because we've got you heard already one person say, I don't want tall buildings. So I'm not saying I like them or don't like them, but we got to get done.
Time's up, Councilor. You want a response from Mr. Dixon on that? Mr. Dixon?
Mr. Dixon will jump right in. So clearly, I would agree with everything you're saying and the conundrum you put forth. And to me, it is, first of all, not telling people what they want to hear, but telling them what they need to hear in a way they're willing to listen. And that really involves giving them the information they need, but also taking responsibility for ensuring that they benefit and they understand the benefits of the changes you're talking about. Does that make sense? If you say 50-story building 4 blocks from you, that you might get a real loud no. If you say that 50-story building will allow us to create 2 new parks, a walkable main street that you can hang out in, and where your kids can bike, and some new parks and affordable housing, so you have a place to age in your community, and a series of other benefits that mean something to you. And you know what? Not a blade of grass in your neighborhood is going to change in the process. and it takes a little bit of time to have that conversation, you can get a different result. Is that fair? I've got to say, Dublin, believe me, the good citizens of Dublin, Ohio did not start out saying we want dense centers and a new downtown, but they strongly support, they moved during a planning process to strongly support that outcome and continue to. Is that making sense?
Very good. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. And yeah, it's incumbent on us to take that leadership to communicate very well, to explain and what, for me, it's about how our decisions today are judged 10, 20, 30 years from now. That's all that's going to matter is, once we have that we get it right, and that we, in the city building process, make those tough decisions now, even if it, and take the leadership to make those decisions for the best interest of everyone that's going to ultimately live in Richmond Hill. I don't see any other members weighing in. Oh, Councillor West, second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple of things. I know that in the presentation that we had on the website and that we were sent, there's some appendices that were supporting kind of key directions. I presume that we're to be talking about that at this point in time. Is that correct?
Sure. Well,
okay.
You can ask questions at this time, that's for sure.
Well, I don't actually have a question so much as I have a couple of comments. I mean, there's a lot of information in there. And Sybil, at the beginning of this presentation, did make a point of saying that we want to endorse the staff going back out in the next phase to the public to hear what they have to say about all of this. And I sorry, I forgot to mention that in my first round. So I would certainly suggest that would be a good idea. And I suspect that most members of council, if not all, would be into that. But I just wanted to comment on a couple of them. I read through it quickly, and as I said, there's a lot to absorb in there. On page 74, they talk about the Major Mackenzie corridor. I do agree with, I think, what I'm hearing in that brief description on page 74, that we're acknowledging the future BRT corridor along Major Mackenzie, but we're kind of also acknowledging the fact that there is limited development potential in that area, both because there isn't a lot of land that isn't already taken up by established subdivisions, or like the ravine behind the hospital, for example. But there's also, limited potential that, putting a large development right next to one of those established neighborhoods is limited in its potential as well. So I do appreciate the information that's on there. I think that, those appendices, if council members haven't read them already, have some really important detail to expand on what Mr. Dixon has talked about. I presume Councillor Munch was talking about me when he was implying that I said that I didn't want to see any tall buildings. That's actually not what I said. And as a matter of fact, I think Mr. Dixon and I in the follow-up mentioned that I think tall buildings do have absolutely a place in Richmond Hill, and I know we're going to be considering that. As you, Mr. Chair, had mentioned, we have a real good opportunity in the downtown center area at Highway 7 and Yonge for those types of buildings. So to clarify, if Councillor Munch didn't understand what I was saying, was that tall buildings definitely have a place in this plan. That's clear. I just think that we need to be very selective on where we put the density and how much density we put there. And the comments that I was making, and I'll reiterate, were that, I think that buildings can be made that are appropriately sized and human scaled to create the kind of spaces and vision that we are looking for in our community. So anyway, I just want to clarify that. But anyway, as I said, I thank you, Mr. Dixon, for your presentation. I think we're on the right track, and the devil is in the details here. But I think, we need to set out a framework, and I like the process that staff has led us through thus far. But I really think that this next round of the process is just as important, if not more so, than the first round. And I know that the public has done a very good job and been very generous in their time in commenting and providing input in the lead up to this. And I will certainly be encouraging the public to continue to be engaged and make sure that their voices are heard and you know, we get this right. So anyway, those are my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Now, did you want to maybe add to your motion that we receive the presentation and endorse the continuation of the public process based on all of the, like you said, appendices that are added here, and on the basis of all of this information that needs to be presented to the public again for another round of public?
I think if you feel that that's appropriate, I'm happy to do it. I don't want it to get missed, and that is what staff had mentioned briefly at the beginning of the presentation. I do assume that's what will happen anyway, though. But yes, I would be happy to put it in if you think that's appropriate.
It is, but they did ask, you know, staff did ask for a presentation, and Sibel, you know, you might want to weigh in, please. We don't need another presentation that goes into. There's so much information here, and we have it. We have the benefit of all this. I just want to say, I wanted to ask you if there's more that you want to add at this point in time.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. There is a high-level presentation with respect to some of the main key directions that we were prepared to share with Council. If you feel, I mean, I recognize it's 3 o'clock. If we could go directly to questions with respect to those key directions, but maybe I would like to at least present the next steps portion for Council if you'd prefer that I don't go over the emerging directions portion of the presentation.
That would be perfect. You know, and councillors in their questions can ask for you to elaborate on or clarify anything that's in the fuller report. But yeah, if you want to just give us a high level overview and what's our next steps.
Okay. So if we could get the presentation back on the screen, if now's an appropriate time. So David's presentation was a good setting of the table for these key directions. And as you know, we provided the slides in advance, and the intent was to speak to a majority of the key directions, and as well, if there were any questions about the more detailed directions and the appendices, we would be happy to answer those questions. However, you know, given the time that we have, maybe I'll just quickly indicate to Council, if we could go to slide 28 for just a moment. The intent here for these key directions is to form a foundation for the official plan update for amendments that are to come as part of phase 3. So the key directions report, which we would be bringing to Council at the end of the year, would outline what all of these key directions are and provide a bit of a rationale for them. And they're all framed based on the vision and urban structure that we've discussed with the public in the beginning of the year, as well as those 4 pillars. So again, just want to be clear, it's the foundational piece for phase 3 work. And we just would, through the next few months, want to finalize those directions and have endorsement by Council. The next slide is the vision, which you've all heard me speak about several times, so I don't need to go through that again. And the following slide, number 30, just speaks to those 4 pillars that we presented. And we've got endorsement from the public for both the pillars and the vision. So the key directions report, you'll see it responds to questions that were posed in our 2019 staff report when we initiated the official plan amendment, and we have them in these 8 categories. And the next slide is just simply the actual questions that are posed, and how these key directions respond to them are what the following slides would be about. This slide, number 33, is simply the outline of what that future key directions report will look like, just so that you kind of understand what the intent here is in terms of talking about key directions and where all that information will finally find itself in this report that will come to Council. The next slide just identifies what are all of the inputs into the key directions so far. And what you'll see on the slide is that there are some documents that are approved or complete, whereas others are still a draft or in process, and some are just emerging. And I just want to be clear for council, this was always the intent that this official plan update would be happening concurrently with a number of other related initiatives. And so that's why some of the documentation we're relying upon are still not finalized, but do help to inform key directions. And we can iterate with the official plan update as well as those other related projects. But we're learning through the ongoing work that we're doing in all of these different initiatives that are identified on this slide. So in terms of the key direction for urban structure, it really is building on those big moves that we spoke about back in February, and I mentioned them again earlier in the presentation. But I think one thing to be mindful of is the idea that we're going to facilitate development and provide commensurate infrastructure to accommodate regional growth forecasts for Richmond Hill. And I think this goes to the conversation you were having with Mr. Dixon about public realm and private realm. There is a partnership that we have to have, and we have been having, and we need to continue to have with the development industry, where they provide certain forms of development and we provide supporting forms. And one of the key things that we will be doing in the next few months is really looking at what is that population and job forecast? What kind of infrastructure do we need to support it? And can we make sure that as we make our updates to the official plan, we're ensuring there's going to be development of the private and public works will be in lockstep with each other. And I think that was kind of really responds to the question that Councillor Munch mentioned as well. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see this is the draft population forecast that the region is proposing. This was issued in March, and as some of you may know, there's still some consideration of what the final forecast will be. The region will be reporting back on that in October. But for now, we're seeing a growth to 2051 of 317,000 people and 122,000 jobs. Which is quite an increase from where we are today. 2021, the estimated population is about 212,000 in Richmond Hill today. So it's a significant growth over the next 30 years. And again, like as I said before, the important thing for us is to take that kind of forecast information and model it in our infrastructure planning and ensure that we have the capacity, whether existing or planned, to accommodate that kind of growth, and make plans, our master planning, align with their official plan work so that we can ensure that there is that lockstep process. And we will be sharing that forecast information also with school boards and utility companies, again, to ensure that we will be able to accommodate the kind of growth we expect over the next 20 and even 30 years. The next slide is about our urban structure. And what we're showing here is how the urban structure, generally, we're maintaining our 2010 framework of having centers and corridors, directing the majority of growth to them. But we've also identified a couple of new centers, which we had talked about in May, which include the Bathurst and Highway 7 area, as well as the Beaver Creek and Highway 7 area, converting that from employment to mixed use. We've also identified Newkirk as a center. I mean, it was always identified as a local development area, but promoting it to a local center. And really kind of reinforcing the regional structure from an MTSA perspective, where we direct growth up along Highway 7 all the way to Bloomington Road, and Yonge Street all the way up to Bloomington Road from Highway 7, and again, having the directing growth along Highway 7, where we have the BRT transit and the MTSA areas to accommodate majority of growth, and putting our jobs in those areas as well as in our employment areas. In terms of the built form, this starts to get into more details in terms of how we plan for our communities, again, combining public realm and private realm, and making sure that we're working together. There's a proper interface between these realms. And as land becomes more scarce and place becomes more desirable, there will be competing interests. And we think the solution to that will be to alter our built form standards from the current norms, and in some cases allow for a blurring of ownership where both private and public realm matters are commingled. And this built form will vary. It'll vary across the city, and it will need to be planned considering the local context in terms of physical form and land use, as well as the environmental, social, and economic context. And so to manage interests and respond to context, we need innovative solutions and policies, and some of those things David spoke about earlier. And in the next few slides, I'll elaborate on some of those key directions in relation to the built form, but you'll see there are other matters that are identified in the appendix that I won't be going into. So if we can just move to the next slide. You'll see again the reinforcement of directing majority of growth to our centers and corridors and upholding the hierarchy that we have identified for intensification, and promoting development that prioritizes active transportation over private automobile use. So the whole notion of walkability, we want to reinforce that as we move through our official plan update. From a neighborhood's perspective, we want to ensure that we continue to we want to recognize that it's really important that we recognize the diversity of neighborhoods across the city. And that as we continue to plan for these areas, we should not lose sight of those distinguishing features. And this goes to David's comment about, not impacting a blade of grass in some of our neighborhoods. But at the same time, we also want to look to opportunities to improve our neighborhoods. There's always room for improvement. I tell my kids that all the time. So we want to make them more complete. And we certainly heard through, even though we were talking about our centers, our public consultation definitely spoke to the desire for more main streets, more ability to, walk to their, day-to-day activities. And so we want to make our neighborhoods more complete and age-friendly. And that does mean we need to allow for some change within them to adapt to our changing needs and lifestyles of Richmond Hill residents. And this goes to David's comment, is the worst thing that we could do is plan for a community where our kids are not able to live in it when they are mature and become adults. And so it's really understanding, how do we accommodate that? How do we make sure those university graduates are going to be able to live and work in Richmond Hill? And that's what we're planning for. And at the same time, we know our population is aging, and we want to make sure that those people who are working in Richmond Hill and choose to retire still wish to live in Richmond Hill and retire in Richmond Hill. So if we can go to the next slide, please. From an employment land perspective, we still believe it's important to protect our employment areas. While we have suggested there are a few areas where conversion would be appropriate to allow for a greater mix of land use. And what we want to make sure, and this is certainly what we've heard through our business community consultations, is that there's some more flexibility within our employment areas so that they are vibrant places for people to work in as well. And then from a greenway system perspective, the greenway is our natural areas, our rural areas, our agricultural areas, and we haven't done a great job of promoting the greenway area for growth and development in a way that is sustainable. And so, there are opportunities for tourism, for nature appreciation, for advanced, for promoting our major open spaces. And we want to also help to, provide uses that are supportive of the agricultural economy in this area and the broader area. And so there is opportunity to provide that better understanding of what are permitted uses within those areas and capitalize on those in, again, an environmentally and social sustainable way. And we also recognize that there's opportunities for green energy, to renewable energy opportunities within those areas as well. And finally, we'll want to ensure that we do designate and provide policy direction for our prime agricultural areas that are being identified at the provincial and regional level. So this slide, the next slide, talks about our mobility hierarchy. This is certainly something that's embedded in our official plan, but we're thinking we need to maybe make it a little bit more obvious and recognize, you know, our main goal is providing that walkable, complete community. As we plan for areas, we want to ensure that that priority is being upheld. And as you can see, there's.
I do apologize,
One moment, Sibel.
Ms. von Kersel. We have an absence of quorum. Oh, thank you. We now have quorum again,
Okay.
Mr. Acting Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chan, coming on there. Go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem.
But I think, you know, you can wrap up and get to the
Sure.
the meat and potatoes here.
Okay, so I guess just the one thing is we wanted to also recognize electric vehicles. They're definitely on the horizon, and we will account for that in our planning. The next slide is just about our built form. And again, this goes to a lot of questions about height density. Really, it's about having proper design and working and evaluating projects based on criteria rather than numerics in a lot of cases. And this is something that we'll want to consult on and develop appropriate policy for. So recognizing the need to move forward, the next few slides are about intensification. And really, again, the key element here is ensuring that intensification happens in lockstep with the provision of public realm. There's a lot of appendices related to the intensification for specific centers in terms of some key directions. So if we can just maybe move forward with the next few slides. And sorry, I'll just get you to slide next steps. So that's slide 52, if that's okay. So what we are proposing to do in the next few months is we are going to have a meeting with the building industry, and that will be a joint meeting to also speak about analysis and work that's being done by our zoning team and our transportation team with respect to typology of buildings, as well as our parking and transportation demand management strategy. In late September, we'll release an online survey to talk about key directions that I've shared with you in the presentation and in the appendices. And we will host an open house on October the 14th to, again, provide an opportunity for the public to see what our proposed key directions are and ask questions of staff. And then in November, our intention is to release the key directions report, you know, after fine tuning it based on the consultation we've had with the public and stakeholders and the committee. And at that same time, just as a note, we are anticipating the York region will be releasing a draft of its official plan. And then in the December 8th council meeting, it's our intention to bring forward the key directions report for council endorsement. And again, really to kind of get your endorsement that we've established the appropriate framework for doing the official plan update and help us to launch phase 3 of the official plan, where we would be bringing forward amendments to the official plan. At the same time, there are other related works ongoing. So if we go to the next slide, this identifies a lot of the related work that's being undertaken, including the affordable housing strategy. And we had a good conversation about that already. And we also will be continuing our comprehensive zoning bylaw technical papers, which will help to inform not only the key directions, but also amendments to the official plan. The Parks Plan, Recreation and Culture Plan, Transportation Master Plan, and Urban Master Environmental Services Plan. That's still work that's being undertaken. And as I mentioned before, the intention is to share with them a draft growth forecast for them to be able to model and determine what our infrastructure that we would need to support growth within Richmond Hill. And you'll also see there are some other strategies that are underway that again will inform the key directions and possibly amendments to the official plan. So if we can go to the next slide, this is a diagram that generally outlines how our work is being undertaken, very high level, as well as the supporting related work. And one thing to note is while the region is proposing to bring forward a draft of their official plan in November for public review and comment, they don't anticipate bringing the final one forward for adoption until June of 2022. So what that means for us is that puts a little bit of a delay on being able to bring forward amendments for adoption that would be in conformity with the regional plan. So what we're proposing, and maybe it's easier if I show it in the next slide, and I think Kelvin briefly mentioned it in the very beginning of our presentation, was we propose to bring forward amendments to council in 3 buckets. So the first bucket would be in July of 2022. These 2 amendments, the Vision and Urban Structure Amendment and a Neighborhoods Amendment, we don't believe would pose any kind of conformity conflict, and definitely are things that would be in lockstep with the regional direction. So we believe we can advance these amendments to Richmond Hill Council for adoption in July. And this is not different than what we did with respect to our Leslie Street institutional area, which we brought into effect in 2020. The next set of amendments, if we can go to the next slide, is with respect to a number of matters. And these ones do have a direct connection with the regional official plan and the need to ensure that we are in conformity with the approved plan that would be approved by the province without it, and it's not subject to appeal. So it's not like it'll be sitting, waiting a long drawn out appeal process. So this one, we propose again to have a number of amendments, but the expectation is to kind of bring them forward to council through one consolidated, document, so you can see how they all interrelate with each other. And we propose to bring that forward in early to mid 2023, following approval of the regional official plan and a new council being elected. And then the last bucket, if we can go to the next slide, is with respect to 4 amendments. 3 of them are for what we are calling new mixed-use centers. And we believe these 4 amendments need some much more consultation time and analysis than maybe what that second bucket of amendments would be. And for that reason, we're proposing to advance those in late 2023. And then if we can just go to the last slide, I don't think it's appropriate to finish the presentation without again highlighting for everyone's benefit the importance of partnership and consultation, both in terms of developing the update to the official plan as well as implementing it. So as we move forward through all of these phases, we do make an effort to ensure that we're engaging with staff, council, city residents and businesses, as well as all of the stakeholders and interest groups that you see surrounding this diagram. And we will continue to do that, through the conclusion of phase 2 as well as into phase 3. And that is the end of my presentation. Sorry for kind of going through this very quickly, but we'd be happy to take questions about anything I've brought to your attention or any of the information that's on the slides.
Thank you, Sibel. That's great. I think you've got us all on the same page as to where we're going. We look forward to hearing the feedback from residents as this this is rolled out to them and unveiled. And do any members of council have a question there? Can we vote on Councillor Mest's motion to receive and to endorse the plan going forward? Councillor Silovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment and perhaps a response from staff. First of all, thank you again, Mr. Dixon. Your presentations are always superb. Could you go back to slide 39, please, on the presentation? Thank you. So I just want to bring staff's attention to our neighborhoods. If you look in the second column there, it says respect character and distinguishing features of neighborhoods across the city. And then if you could go to slide 42, please. 42. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Urban design policies need to respond to changing built form. What I just want to say is this, and I know that staff are very absorbed with this, and that you are also involved with the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and that most likely discussions about this will center mainly around that. But speaking for Ward 5 and the residents that I represent, there is a growing concern amongst our residents who live in established neighborhoods. So in other words, they've lived there for years or even decades. And infill development is changing the very nature of those established neighborhoods. So when we talk about respecting policies, respecting design, respecting built form, it is incumbent upon us that we also respect our established neighborhoods and those residents who have been living in those neighborhoods for years, and their entire lives revolve around those homes. Their entire life savings revolve around those homes. And like I said, there's this growing concern that infill development with much larger houses, which continue to be approved by Committee of Adjustment or come through council public meeting if there needs to be an OP amendment as well. The residents feel that they are being pushed out, that their lives are not being respected within these established neighborhoods. So somewhere along the line, when we move to the comprehensive zoning bylaw or we move further into the depth of these discussions with regards to neighborhoods, I ask that staff be very, very sensitive to the needs of these specific residents. They're not against development. They understand development must occur on the intensification corridors, on the arterial roads prescribed for transit. But when it comes to their homes and their neighborhoods, they feel that they are not being heard, and they feel that their needs are not being respected. So that's just a bit of the background here. So if Sibel, if you could comment, if it's you or another member of staff on that issue, which I know is of concern to so many people that I represent. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Silovitz. Sibel, did you want to comment on that?
Sure. I think this is certainly something that we will be consulting on in terms of how our neighborhood policies can be improved, as well as our urban design framework policies. I think the key here is what we talk about is new development provides a net benefit to the community. That's the lens in which we will be looking at development proposals. Is there a net benefit? And perhaps having that lens may actually address some of the concerns that you've raised, Councillor Silovitz. And it's something that, again, in terms of what are those policy changes, that is something we will work on through phase 3 to clarify for members of the Committee of Adjustment. and for council and staff and an applicant to understand what the expectations are. And then, of course, that'll get translated into our zoning bylaw as well.
Thank you, Sibel. I really appreciate that. I think that these residents really need to know that we're listening to them and we're aware of their concerns, and we'll do everything we can in our power as a municipality to try and protect and safeguard their lives in their established neighborhoods. It's very, very important when we discuss or we talk about planning for 2041 or 2051. Everything is telescoped into the future. And we need to also think about the present and how the future, how anything we discuss now for the future is also impacting right now the present. So thank you, Sibel. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my comments.
Well, thank you, Councillor Silovitz, and that's very important. We need strong wording in this official plan update that helps us protect our existing neighborhoods. We are what we are because of the charming nature of our communities. We have to respect not only our natural heritage but our built heritage. That's what makes Richmond Hill unique. And since we are absorbing all this population on our centers and corridors, we need the wording to be able to fight to preserve our existing neighborhoods. That's the whole thrust of us. Accepting the population has to go somewhere and forcing it on out to the transit service corridors. So thank you. Councillor Munch, you wanted to weigh in?
Good day. Thank you. I don't really want to go into, I'll gladly engage people, but I'm very concerned about rooming houses. I understand people want to protect neighborhoods, but I'm really concerned about having safety and security in our community first, and providing basic shelter and quality of life. That's what I hope that we're going forwards with, not necessarily talking about the idiosyncrasies of one street over another. Having said that, I have a question on slide 36. So the data there, that's jobs of 201,000, 248, and 317. Are those jobs Richmond Hill not jobs? Because I had a different number from staff. And when was that upgraded?
So you'll see a difference in the numbers because these jobs include work from home jobs. So I had that same question. Our socioeconomic report shows a smaller number of jobs, but that doesn't incorporate the work from home. When you add in work from home, the numbers are higher.
The roughly 8,000 difference, or 13% upside is what I think I calculated. So in 2016, we had an increase in jobs. So my question here is that when we get an upgrade of information like that, because that's a pretty significant bump. I don't know if any other member of council caught that, but I caught it because I go through every single number and I qualify it with all the others of every single piece of number that we get at council. It takes a lot of time for us to do that. So where did that information come from? Was it in the census? Because I didn't see it in the census numbers. So I'm wondering where'd the upgrade numbers come from?
So, sorry, as shown on the slide, the source is from York Region. And we've also identified, there is a footnote on the slide to indicate that it includes work from home jobs.
Okay, so the source is York Region. Okay, fair enough. Anyway, so the thing is, and when we get that kind of upgrade like that, it'd be really good, if possible, if you were to send us a note, because when we have data from 2016, which is 5 years ago, and that's been upgraded, we're basing, and it leads me to the next question. We're basing our forecast based in our going forward plan based on numbers, and we're qualifying. So when I see these forecast numbers being upgraded from the region, how are these forecast numbers real? For example, I've asked this question a lot of late. So when we do a forecast and we don't meet the forecast, we're spending growth numbers and infrastructure as if we're doing forecasts like police and in our case, firefighting. But if we don't meet those forecasts, like we're at 70% of our forecast numbers, which means we've spent 30% more than we've actually done. What do we do going forward if we do not meet these forecast numbers? How are they qualified, and what are the plans going forward? Because we've not met any of our forecast targets 2 times in the last 20 years. 2 times in the last 20 years. So I'm saying now going forward, we're doing a 30-year plan. When are we going to, what happens if we don't meet these numbers? What's the ramifications? And when are we getting evaluated that we meet these targeted growth numbers? Because if we have people saying, hey, I don't want infill in our neighborhoods, and we don't want intensification on corridors to the same degree, and we're not meeting our forecast numbers, but we're spending like we are, that's not a good sign. So I'd like to know, when are we evaluating this? How are we evaluating it? When are the numbers, when they're adjusted, being brought to us to inform us so that we can download our budgets? Because if we hire staff based upon growth that doesn't happen, we're having a 1% growth right now. We used to have 3% growth. Yet people are thinking we're overdeveloped, yet we're vastly underdeveloped. So the market is much different. Than the market being our voters and the residents today are much different. And when our staff, as we talked earlier, that staff and the government is responsible for communicating to the public, I'd be willing to bet to the very few people the public knew, and maybe members of council didn't know that we had that big increase. What about all the other numbers that are adjusting downward? So when the Ryerson did their report on Richmond Hill 6 months ago, and the University of Toronto did the report in the summer, it was really opened my eyes to say, oopsie, I'm a counselor here in Richmond Hill, and I wasn't aware of all these things. So can you help me out with that?
Maybe I can take a stab at that through the chair to Councillor Munch. The numbers that you see are targets, and they're not something that we have to meet, not something that we will meet. They're targets, and they're based on forecasts, and the forecasts start at provincial growth, and that's assigned to the region. Then the region assigns growth to us based on somebody's best estimate. And circumstances change over time. Certain areas grow a little faster or a little slower, but it's impossible to be spot on, nor do you need to. And so when I say you don't need to, what I'm referring to is that we will spend our dollars on infrastructure and the region based on the growth that actually happens, not based on growth that is projected. Because why would you build 3 expensive sewers before you knew coming? If it's not going to happen, spend the money on it. So these are just simply projections into the future as to where we're going to get to, based on our available knowledge, based on past performance, based on what might happen when the subway gets here, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't believe there's any effort or dollars wasted if we don't meet a certain target. But these targets are there to do some long-term infrastructure planning, but until we see the growth really happening, no one will spend the dollars on it. So I don't believe there's any wasted.
So
sorry to jump in, Councillor Munch. You still got a minute 8 on the clock. I just want to jump in there. As a budget chair, I don't know when we're making these adjustments for the actuals, because we've had the slowest growth in the last 2 years, in 2019 and 2020, in the last 50 years in Richmond Hill. Richmond Hill has never grown at a slower rate than they have in 2019 and 2020, and we're probably looking at the same thing in 2021. I think that's what our public needs to understand. At the beginning of this, no term of council has ever experienced a slower rate of growth in the last 50 years in Richmond Hill. So I hope our public understands that. But it sounds like Director Lee is telling us that our actuals are going to begin to adjust accordingly in our infrastructure spending. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm happy.
Councillor Munch, but carry on. You have the floor.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you so much. We need to have this dialogue. When the region is $3.6 and $3.8 billion in debt, when we have a subway coming up here that's based on growth. We're having a subway come up to your Richmond Hill, and the residents and councillors understand there's a $250 million cost to Richmond Hill residents. So we don't get that growth. We have a $250 million cost. We have a $182 million operating budget, and we don't get the growth. That means residents are on the hook for that. That's a real number. That $250 million is not a forecast, not a hypothetical. It's a real number. And for us, if we continue to do what we're doing now, I hope, because I'm hearing back from the public, we talked with the perfect forum. The public expects that if we don't meet our forecasted growth numbers, that we would reduce our capital going forward. Not, I'm willing to pay taxes to get more servicing that we don't need. And I'm not hearing that from staff saying that the forecasts don't matter. Budgets will align themselves. I don't agree with that. We have to live within our means. If we don't agree to these forecasts, why are we spending the amount of money that we're doing without any accountability? And that's my view, is that we should be accountable to reach our forecast. We are such in a bad state, amongst the worst in Canada. Yet the public doesn't know that. Maybe some staff don't know that the stats are horrible. And this is pre-COVID. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Munch. It's good points. We have to examine this all in that context. And Mr. Dixon, you wanted to weigh in?
No, I apologize. I'm being very rude. I have to drop off, and I'm sorry.
Okay,
I
very.
just wanted to. Didn't
Well,
want to.
thank you for your time. I think we all want to move along. Okay, thank you very much for all your input.
Good luck.
Councillor West has a motion on the floor. I don't see anyone else looking to speak to it. Councillor West, as vice chair, did you want to add to your motion an endorsement of staff's next steps?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. So Mr. Clerk, you're going to add that it's just a receipt of all the presentations today, and that this committee endorses our staff to go ahead with the next steps as indicated. Okay, so all in favor of the motion on the floor? Okay, very good. Is anyone opposed? Okay, very good. That carries. Okay, so thank you very much, committee. That concludes our business. Our date of our next meeting is to be determined, and our staff will let us know as they unfold that public process. So I just need a motion for adjournment from Councillor Chan. All in favor? Any opposed? Very good. That carries. Okay, we stand adjourned. Good afternoon, everyone. Take care.